I was just told that maybe she might not participate in the debate. It obviously might be a bit complicated, but still, Elise is going to ask her. I can already start maybe with giving just a few points of what we heard so far by the three different proposition intervention that we had. So we started with Karen Archey, and which very cleverly pointed out the various influences of virtual space and networked communities on the mediation of the body and sexuality. She gave very interesting and challenging examples with different artists like Anne Hirsch, Bunny Rogers, Angela Washko, Laurie Simmons, and Amalia Ulman, and ended with some question that she raised about for example, is it possible to represent the female body without its inevitable sexualization? How are these politics complicated and amplified by an artist's usage of social media, and so on? Then Gabrielle Marie talked about that very interesting fact that I wasn't personally expecting it, but on Wikipedia, most of the persons that give input, that write the entries in the encyclopedia are men. Only 15% are women. And she explained what Wikipedia is actually doing to try to diminish this gap, this important gap, and what are the strategies being put on, and a bit also explained at the end how is Wikipedia functioning, and how that very horizontal functioning can deal with that kind of very important issues. And then at the end, Amalia, as we've just seen from probably a hotel room, at least 4 stars somewhere in Europe or across the Atlantic, I don't know, gathered on with that performance that she's been doing early on this year with impersonating a new self, playing on the feminine, the feminism, and playing with both definitions, and also, of course, always playing with the social media element and the way we put ourselves on in the social media. So thank you very much for being here. And Elise Lammer is also here. She's also going to ask questions. So maybe we start here with the first questions as we did this morning in the panel, and then carry on with the audience if you are interested into asking questions. So I don't know. Maybe I have a first question for you, Gabrielle. I was wondering, because in the reasons you gave for the, not absence, but the gap between male and female contribution to Wikipedia, I think you didn't mention something that is quite obvious for us journalists when we do our work. Maybe you've all noticed that in newspapers, most of people talking, most of people being interviewed are men. Maybe 60% is the best, but often 80% men and 20% women are interviewed, whatever the subject. And there are various reasons. At the Courier, we try to be very conscious of that and try not to use the facility of asking always men, because it's easier. Even if they don't know anything about the subject, they say, "Oh yeah, of course, yeah, okay, let's see. All right." So, and they are too happy to be asked the question. They're just not experts, but they feel experts. So, as Wikipedia is really a matter of non-experts, don't you think that it's that fact that maybe it's the same, that women don't feel sufficiently expert to be able to write in something that might be read by millions and millions of people?
Complicated question, because you addressed a lot of things. Well, what I like to say is that everybody has an expertise in something. We all have things that we hello, that we know of, that we have either studied or from our personal experiences or from our readings, we all come across information that is potentially something we can add to the encyclopedia. We get a lot the question of like, there aren't any experts, as you were saying. Actually, there are a lot of experts on Wikipedia. Some pages have like medical pages have doctors actually following them and putting in information. I think the message is really that we can't have an encyclopedia that doesn't represent women's perspective if we want it to be truly representative of who we are as a society, because women are present, so their viewpoints need to be included in the encyclopedia. And I think it is probably something where you can actually see it in other fields where, so for instance, job interviews, negotiating salaries, women don't often negotiate salaries as much as men will do. I mean, I'm falling a little bit in cliches, but there are there is scientific research that actually proves that there is something we do need to ask women for them to show up. But when you do ask them, they do show up.
Having the impression of being an expert. It's not maybe being it or not being it, but maybe the level of feeling an expert is higher when a woman than when a man.
Maybe. I can't.
Maybe, yeah, of course. But it's truly something very obvious when you're a journalist, when you're asking a politician about something, even if he doesn't really know. A man will say yes in 8 cases on 10, and a woman will probably say no if she doesn't feel at ease with the subject.
Well, I think that this should also kind of go back to a consideration of what women feel comfortable speaking about. And also, I'm really glad that you made the point that when we're talking about women, it's not necessarily, based on sex, but more gender. But I was recently reading this text by Urbaines, and she made this really interesting point that a woman is not supposed to talk about herself. She's not supposed to talk about universal subjects. She's supposed to be a caretaker, essentially. And so that is a very invisible position. And this goes back to, it's also amazing to talk about this in this building in which gender is prescribed in the very architecture of the space. I think that these things relate back to a female subject position being tied to being, sorry, I'm going to get really loose Urbaines right now, but basically being based on a virgin mother who's never been sexualized, who's never been, who's never done anything but give birth, essentially, and the male desire to be divorced from that body, and in doing so, does not sexualize himself, but only speaks about the world.
Of course, and Gabrielle, you also mentioned in the gender gap task force there was a disagreement on the term of feminism and what it might have become today. And it's true that we see very often in the 2 last years in the media a lot of women that maybe 5 years ago wouldn't have considered themselves as feminists, that put it on and put it on in a very sexualized way, and they say, okay, I'm free, it's my body, I can show you my tits, but still I'm a feminist. And it's definitely an issue also in this afternoon, and maybe between Amalia and you, Karen, there is a different view of that very question, and you might question the way Amalia is doing her performance, or maybe not. But I was interested maybe to hear you about that and maybe make a comment on I think you know each other, and you've already talked to each other.
You want me to say what I think about the performance, essentially?
Maybe.
I don't know. I guess it's kind of unfair to basically talk about this after I just gave this talk and she didn't hear it. but I don't know, I think that there's something to be said for this kind of basic bitch phenomenon that I think that she's playing on, which is basically this very consumerist idea that a woman can kind of buy into these, you know, very, very normalized consumer culture like Ugg boots or whatever, and that an offspring of that is buying into luxury culture, which I guess she's kind of performing. But the idea that buying into luxury culture as a woman, there's this kind of idea that it's sinful, or it's like, like, ooh, I'm going to the spa, bad me. And I think that the logic behind that is really fascinating, because it's basically that one doesn't deserve it, first of all, and secondly, that can be bought. And I think that some of the problem that I have about Amalia's work is that it kind of inherently mocks that. And I understand the need and desire to buy into luxury. And I don't think it's funny. I think it's actually really, sad in a way. And to mock it is to say that that she, I guess, is beyond that. And I'm certainly not. I mean, I'm certainly not. But yeah, I guess.
Thanks, Karen. I think that just, if I can tie in and comment of on what you just said, I guess the reason why I invited Amalia, Ulman, Karen Archey, and Gabrielle from Wikimedia was actually because I see there are very different ways of thinking about what could be feminism today in relationship to new technologies, and there is indeed a new generation of female artists, most of them born after '89, who very strongly commodify their own image and use their attractiveness as a way to generate attention. And I think that's one kind of very, very strong strategy. That's one, but I really wanted to hear Karen on that topic, because I know you're also very interested in those questions, and you're actually saying that this is probably the wrong way to go if we want to have feminism debate go on in a way. And also, I guess, in terms of Wikipedia, knowing that that's probably the #1 source of research material for contemporary artists, it was also very interesting to notice that this content is generated by men mostly.
I also really need to say that, like, anything that I say about anyone else's practice is, not, I don't really know, it just happened. Anything that I say about someone else's practice is not, it's kind of taboo for me to say, this person should do this and this person shouldn't do that, and to prescribe artists talking or working about the body, or make prescriptions about our usage of the body. I guess.
Can she intervene? Is it possible to have Amalia? Yeah.
Hello, can I? I was trying to hear what Karen was saying about, I guess, about the Instagram performance. My main aim was to experiment with fiction on Instagram, and that's why I chose 3 characters that were known by people and followers on Instagram, so they could start mapping themselves their own narratives without me having to do like write down guidelines or anything for them to understand. She was saying something about joking or something. I generally don't use irony in my work. That's something I always really, I always despise irony, and I'm definitely not on top of anything, or like, I don't see myself in that position of mockery and like pointing things out and saying this is wrong, this is right. Like, it's definitely about that, and that's definitely what the performance was about. It was more about how people make conclusions after a series of like stereotypes they've seen before, and how they like create their own narratives. That was like more the main idea out of that. But yeah, I can barely really like hear things from here. But I don't know. I would like maybe to like to point at the talkers instead of public, because I can really. Also, the thing was more and how capitalists right now use of the idea of the genuine and authenticity, and how that's like this doesn't exist. And then we have all these trends like I woke up like this, or the no filter, or even now all these people taking selfies covered in acne and showing like, oh, I'm not putting makeup on, or I'm so anti-selfie because I'm like have bad skin. When it actually everything is the same place of cashing out this the genuine, which doesn't really exist because everything is a construction. So I think, yeah, that was the main aim of the performance, was to try to point. But obviously, it's full of flaws, and I don't see myself, yeah, as a judge, like person behind. Just keep on going. I'm happy to participate now.
Well, I'd like to commend you, because it can't be easy to do that at a distance on a Skype. So well done for doing that. I just wanted to add to the conversation that I think that there are different types of feminism, and that I think the danger is to try to fit everything into one single category or one box. And I think being too sure of oneself is probably the risk on those kind of topics. And it's very difficult to address a crowd on gender gap, because you are walking on eggs along the way, trying not to, could you hear anything, or, yeah? So yes, it's not easy, and I think that artists really have a role to play in this, because whether you like it or not, it actually brings an emotion. It takes you out of your comfort zone, and it makes you think about what you actually really stand for. So I just think it's interesting to keep an open mind about this topic, and it's an ongoing conversation, and I'm looking forward to being part of it in the next coming years.
In the audience, anybody that wants to ask something to one of the three speakers? Yes.
Hi, I have a question for Karen Archey. I was horrified by one thing in your presentation, and that is how horrifyingly consensual the work you're showing is. I was just wondering if it was a factor of the work that is produced about these issues in like kind of in the digital sphere, or if it's a choice to not shock an audience.
What do you mean by consensual?
I mean, we're talking about an environment. I mean, 4chan is terrifyingly misogynistic, as we know. Reddit has, subreddits about incest, and what we're being shown is pictures of a lady wearing a mask of, well, what's going on here? It's, like.
Well, the text was about sexuality, not like the most terrifying aspects of the internet. I mean, I see where you're coming from, but I haven't really come across a lot of work that delves into that. And not to say that it doesn't exist, but the lineage that I was also kind of building was one that was art historical. So I was looking at people like Laurie Simmons and going back to, second wave feminism, and yeah, that definitely could be illustrated, but I just haven't seen a lot of interesting work about that, and it's also difficult to make work about that kind of that specific version of sexuality because it's really hard to show, and it's also very difficult to make work that is probably not made to be shocking. And of course, in contemporary art, there's this idea that you shouldn't, if you want to shock your audience, you're too desperate. So, I mean, maybe that's it.
Any more questions? Comments? I'm sorry, Amalia.
Well, maybe while we're waiting for Amalia's question, I have a question for you. I was mentioning, Gabrielle, the fact that, well, artists also, of course, use Wikipedia and get a lot of sources and resources from it. Is it something you are conscious of? I don't know how much you're interested in the art field and so on, or if that aspect of also being something very important for young artists that get out of schools and that maybe don't have the knowledge of everything that has been done since the 1960s, but it's so important to know what has been going on. And so it's so important to have something like Wikipedia, and of course the gap, the gender gap is again an issue, as you mentioned it. But is it something that you talk about, the fact that it's also a very important tool for artists, or am I just mentioning it
here? Yes, it is very important, but as you can see with something like they organized in February, the Women Edit, dedicated to beefing up biographies about female artists, there is artists are underrepresented on Wikipedia. So I think that there is definitely content that needs to be added for it to be truly representative of the women's role in the artistic world. And I think, yes, it is important. Everything that is on Wikipedia is sourced and referenced and comes from first or secondary sources. Primary, or secondary sources. So we're dealing in facts, and this is why a topic like this one is so difficult to mention. And people, when they're behind a computer, they tend to forget that they're talking to other human beings sometimes, and there can be a lack of compassion observed in terms of how straightforward people actually talk. I think that it's important to have those conversations in presence also to have this conversation going on. But yes, I think it's definitely important.
The guerrilla girls have been fighting now for some years to have more women artists in the museums. Are they also fighting for Wikipedia to have more women entries and women participating?
I don't think there's actual. If you fit in the criteria to be able to have an article, then there is no reason you don't actually have one. We don't actually really encourage people to self-promote by making their articles themselves, although a lot of people and companies will do that, because obviously today having a Wikipedia page is a form of credibility. I think it's just if anybody feels that they deserve to have a page there, they should actually get maybe organize an editathon or something like that to build that content. I don't think there's like a raging war to actually for artists to say I should be there and I'm not there. I mean, it's a matter of the criterias, and if people are represented in the media and if you qualify, then there's no reason for you not to be there.
And Karen, maybe a future perspective on that very aspect of the intersection of art and technology when we talk about feminist practices. How do you think it could evolve in the, say, next 10 years or 15 years? Do you have an idea?
Thanks for that one. I think that I would really like to see more open discussions about these issues that, we've all raised in this discussion, and, including the work that Amalia makes. And I think that the way in which we operate in the art world right now is very based on a conventional affect that has its roots in patriarchy and, a business structure that I'd really like to see, kind of leave. And I don't know, I guess, yeah, just, I don't know, yeah, more discussion, less objects.
So just to add to that, I also want to ask you something, because I don't have the answer myself, but if you don't have it, it's fine. Like, I guess in terms of aesthetics, of course, we can't really forecast what's going to happen, and that's not really an interesting topic to think of. But I'm wondering how, for example, social media, which is greatly used by Amalia in her work, how does this actually influence artistic production? And if anything, does social media change something in terms of aesthetics, you think? Because I have the feeling that it announces a fourth wave of feminism, because of course, by being present on social media, one could assume that any information put out there, be it good or bad, I'm not putting any judgment here, is actually potentially reaching way more people, right? And in that sense, could foster, alternative ways of, I don't know, passing some sort of political message, such as feminist message. I don't know, do you agree with that, or how do you feel about that? Because you referred to second wave feminism, so I was curious about your opinion.
Well, I think that there's going to be an archival problem, and I have two responses to this. First of all, like, archival problems in art have been around for as long as art exists. And if you look at like a Rauschenberg Combine, for example, if there's like a pack of Marlboro cigarettes, the collector that has that piece will have about 10 backup packs of Marlboro cigarettes that have the kind of label from the year in which the piece was made. And so if we think about internet art from, let's say, 1999, like let's say Olia Lealina's My Boyfriend Came Back from the War, the way in which that piece is experienced is very, very different than how we experience it today, because it's based on the speed in which you can download that page, which during the dial-up era was very different. So the way in which we experience social media today is based on our time and subject position and the interface, its design, so on and so forth. And this is another reason why it's really incredible that Rhizome is building this archiving tool for social media performances. However, I think that one thing that is extremely exploitable and potentially problematic is that we don't know when a performance is a performance on social media, because it's a platform for everyday living. So Amalia, for example, I don't even know how to talk about this work, if it's a work, if it's a performance, but basically emulated this kind of new, can you hear me, Amalia?
Yes.
So kind of emulated this new personality, I guess. And I think that for a long time, people had no idea what was going on and thought that she'd kind of gone off the deep end, and it ended up that, I mean, maybe you can talk about this later. I'd be really curious to hear some explicit, thoughts about what this actually was. But I think, personally, for me, artwork is at its most, its kind of best form when people can recognize explicitly the artist's intentions, I guess. I mean, that might be a tricky statement, but I think that in this case, like, it would have been helpful at some point to understand the intentionality. And when something is on social media, it takes intentionality out of the equation, because it can be a performance of life that isn't specifically artistic, or it, I don't know. But also, it can be interesting to blur these things. I don't know.
Can I?
Please, yeah.
I don't consider this project so much as an artwork, per se, than as an experiment, as a project trying to surround the rhythm of social media, the rhythm and fiction line. That was my main aim. To choose characters that were already known by the audience was part of the strategy to make it more credible. And then, so I mean, in the meantime, I was actually, I was working on my work on shows and essays. In time, this was more an experiment, like self-representation. So I don't see it as this work. It's more like as a project on self-representation, how to use fiction online, which I think people is still like used to, and that's why most people really like. It was like very uncanny for people to really understand that everything is construction and everyone has social and cultural capital behind their Facebook profiles, and everything that they post summing up for some sort of like archive capital. And I think that was the point doing the whole thing, is revealing that structure. So I don't see it like as a as a work of art, more kind of as an experiment to start maybe this fiction like consciously online, or maybe like generating stereotypes, saying like strategies of repetition, like self-promotion, etc. Like that was my main aim. But you can read what I wrote before in Skype.
Amalia, we couldn't hear anything you said. It's kind of a problem. But we'll read now. Yeah.
Okay, I'm just gonna read it. So, yeah, Amalia really wanted to respond, but it was a bit tricky. Sorry about that, Amalia. So what is she saying? I'm reading, but you can see it as well. What I was saying is that the main aim was to point out the construction of the self in social media, how capitalism lives off the idea of genuine and the authentic. When everything is construction and serves for capital accumulation, using Instagram as a tool for normalization to raise oneself on favor of a larger group of subculture. I don't see myself mocking anything, but using these stereotypes in a hyper-accelerated way to point out the possibility for creation of new alternative narratives. Okay, just read it. I don't consider it, sorry, I don't consider it as an artwork, but as a project or experiment on how to use social media for fiction narratives, to therefore construct new stereotypes that represent minorities. Okay. Any question?
Hello. My question is for Gabrielle Marie. At the end of your presentation, you choose an image where we can see a woman. It was an image that represents woman which works in the factories between during the World War II. For propaganda, and it's written weak edit for I think a pedagogic message. But why did you choose the feminism to support your message?
I didn't push it that far because I actually wanted to, I'll be very honest, I don't know myself how I feel about feminism, so I was trying not to pick a side. This visual is just because it's a sort of light visual that is very much used on the gender gap task force, and because I was talking quite a bit about feminism, I thought it'd be good to use that image. It generally makes people smile because of course women can edit, and people go like, yes, of course, I mean, why not? So please don't read anything more than that into it, but that's I'll be more careful next time.
Is there any other question? Yes.
Hello. I don't know if you can hear me, Amalia.
I can.
Yeah. I don't have any question, but I just wanted to say that I love your work, and I followed you on Facebook and Instagram, and it was really a really deep experience, I think. Sorry, my English is a bit bad, but I just wanted to show you some support and love for what you did, and I think you're a very sensitive person, and yes, thank you for that. I love you.
Thank you. There's another question or maybe intervention?
Oh yeah, I would like to ask, what kind of minority are you trying to portray? Are you stand for any minority?
Suspense. Shall I read it? Or maybe I just read it? So, I'm not trying to portray myself any minorities. Obviously, I use mainstream archetypes, just try to point out the possibility for the constructions of new ones, because the gaze is malleable. Some strategy they use in drag queen workshops or drag king workshops, where you dress around imitating gender stereotypes to therefore see very clearly how everything is made up, not intrinsically inherited or naturalized. Thank you. Is there another question? Maybe the last couple of questions.
It's more like a comment, but it's really interesting to me that basically Amalia's performance is continuing because we can't hear her. We could hardly hear her throughout the conversation. And at the same time, she can communicate, so she remains an image, a pretty woman on the screen. But on the other hand, she could communicate because she is typing into the chat window. And I was wondering whether this actually overcomes the point that, if I remember right, Marley is making in her paper, that women don't have a separate viewpoint from men. They internalize the gaze and the male gaze, and there is basically no way out of this dilemma. So maybe there is a possibility, if image is everywhere, but you keep talking, that the image will become obsolete. Especially in terms of like everything can be a fetish. If it's always if it becomes visible, everything can become a fetish, and the female body is just one. Then I don't know. I'm just an optimist.
Thank you for your thought. Is it something you want to talk about, answer? It wasn't really a question. Is there another question? Maybe the two last questions?
Yes, I'd like to ask Gabrielle some questions about how do you relate less participation of women in Wikipedia to the question of education and access to education for women, especially in the third world countries?
Sorry, I couldn't hear the end, especially for?
Access to the education, because in the most of the less developed countries, women are less access to education. Yes. And to participate to Wikipedia needs education. How do you put this? Because you mentioned many points about why didn't women participate in Wikipedia. And I think that's the most important part of why most of women, they don't participate because they don't have access to education.
Yeah, it's very difficult because you always need to have some sort of rationale with facts and figures. And on this topic, it's a sensitive one, and we don't actually know how to represent that. What I can say is that we have a tool called Kiwix, which is Wikipedia offline, and there's an offline dissemination project, which is essentially for Wikipedia that is on a USB stick, and you basically have the whole database available in all the languages. The idea is to be able to share this database with the third world countries, to be able for people who maybe don't have access to internet to still be able to access this free encyclopedia. So this is an example of the kind of projects we have to maybe support the fact that women can read articles. It's a tricky question you asked. I think in terms of education, it's also interesting to see that we have an inverted pyramid when it comes to women in studies, and then like high-profile academics. So like in biology, for instance, you will have a lot of women that are actually at university, but there are actually more men that are maybe people that have PhDs or that are lecturers in those fields. And I think that there's definitely a role to play for Wikipedia in education, and which is why we are now trying to get into schools. So we have a local program, for instance, where we're engaging 15 to 18 years old to write about the cities in the canton, for instance. It's very difficult to talk about this subject and delicate, because it requires, to be able to contribute, it requires that you can write and that you can have access to internet, and unfortunately it is still not the case for many people.
Last question.
Hey, what's up, Amalia? It's Chino. I'm here with Elijah, but he was hey. He was sleeping, so he didn't get to make it. But I just wanted to shout you out. Love you, and love everything you're doing. Hope to see you again soon.
Excellent. Thank you.